Our next presenter is Chris Church. He's founder and chief product officer at MacroFab. So, Chris?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Excellent. All right, so advancing adoption of manufacturing platforms. That's what I want to talk about today. Before we get into that, who am I? I know that some of you here I've met before and I've worked with before. My role, I am the Chief Product Officer, and I was the founding CEO at MacroFab. I've been in software technology and startups for about 30 years. Manufacturing is actually one of the newer industries for me. I came through the networking, the cybersecurity, and then ultimately went into robotics. So my way of coming to electronics manufacturing was by being a customer. Right, I started out, I had a little startup. We were doing motion control systems for filmmakers. It was really an itch I had to scratch. I really wanted to make robots as a kid. So as an adult, when I had the chance to come up with a robot and make it and bring it to market, I thought that was the coolest thing ever until I had to figure out how to build these things every day. And it was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. But I'm not going to go into that. We're going to talk about MacroFab and digital manufacturing platforms. So at MacroFab, we are a manufacturing platform for electronics. We are also backed by the world's only managed marketplace for electronics manufacturing. What does that mean? Basically, our customers come to our platform. They can upload their design files. They can get an instantaneous quote. And then we manage all of the manufacturing through that platform. So they're able to, we have about 100 different factories we work with in North America, primarily US and Mexico. So whether we're talking about a prototype, single unit, hey, I was just testing this out, or if we're talking about tens of thousands of units that need to be produced over a multi-year time frame, we connect them with the right factories while we manage all of the supply chain, the engineering, the tooling, all of that. So we have facilities in Houston and Guadalajara. We have about 225 employees, and we've built, last year we shipped about 1 million PCBs. Not a lot for some of the CMs that are probably here, but this is for 1,000 customers. So we've got a lot of people doing one. We've got a lot of people doing thousands, and that's a big challenge for any company to deal with that sort of scale, that variability in there. But that will bring me to what is a manufacturing platform. There are a lot of, if we think about platforms, a lot of people look at them in very different ways. There's a platform you use for your finance. There's a platform you use for this. There's a platform you use for that. Fundamentally, a platform is a method of delivering software solutions to a customer. But when we talk about the manufacturing platforms, what we're really talking about is enabling someone to order a custom manufactured good through a self-service software system. Right, so these are the manufacturing platforms I'm going to talk about today. And there are two ways in which those platforms really deliver those products. You have the connected factory platforms. Those are the ones like Proto Labs and Circuit Hub, et cetera, where they have a single factory, or in some cases several owned factories, that are connected through that platform directly to the customer. And so when you go to buy something, all those manufacturing instructions flow right to the machines. It's a really highly optimized process with the constraints that you only have the capacity of those factories. Now, with a marketplace, what will happen with those is the orders come in, and then they're distributed to other factories. Like in our case, we are both. So we own a factory where we do prototype and NPI work, and then we also work with about 100 other factories that are more specialized at different types of orders that we are. And then we route the right jobs to the right factory at the right time. Typically, if we're dealing with a large production run, it's going to come to our factory first. We're actually going to set up all of that equipment, all of the processes to build that product, run through it with our engineering team, develop those manufacturing instructions, and then deliver it on to another factory to continue to the actual production. So we are what we call this managed marketplace with an owned factory. And we've noticed that a lot of the other manufacturing platforms out there today are actually doing a hybrid themselves. So we'll see Proto Labs A few years ago, Proto Labs, they actually bought 3D Hubs. They were not a marketplace before. They had 2 or 3 factories of their own, and they went out and bought a marketplace to fold that in, to expand that capacity for their customers. Companies like Fictive have been fully marketplace from the beginning. Xometry started out in-house manufacturing and then shifted to a marketplace. And we're seeing they're doing a little bit of the reverse now, adding some in-house capabilities as well. And those are on the mechanical side. These are 3 of the big names you're likely to see out there today. There are a lot more than these. On the electronic side, there are fewer of us because this is actually surprisingly a more complicated challenge than the mechanicals. Right? With mechanical, you're typically building one thing out of one part through 1 or 2 processes. And as we know with electronics, there's a lot more to it than that. There's hundreds of different manufactured parts going into a custom fabricated PCB with different parameters for every job going down the line. So that has naturally restricted this a little bit, but there's still a number of players out there. Let's talk about the history, the timeline here for manufacturing platforms, because I think there's something really important to learn out of this, and I think this ties into some of the conversations everybody was having earlier around digital transformation. Look at that timeline. In 1999, 2 of the big manufacturing platforms start up, Proto Labs and eMachine Shop. I actually was a user of eMachine Shop long before I was a user of Proto Labs. But what were the challenges they had to face? Why is there such a gap? We don't see an explosion of marketplaces until 2013. The reality was that Proto Labs and eMachine Shop had to build everything from the ground up to solve this entire challenge, to go from the customer's design file to a price, to a manufactured good, to shipping out the door. These 2 companies had to build all of their technology from scratch. eMachine Shop has their own CAD tool. That's the path they chose. JLC, PCB, I have them here at 2006. They weren't doing online orders for PCBs back then. They were a parts distributor, right? They were doing production work and PCB. They're a very interesting vertical. Circuit Hub did not start out as a marketplace for electronics. They started out as a data management system for electronic designs. But in 2013, look at that, all of these marketplaces start in that year. All of the electronics platforms launch in the 4th quarter of 2015 or the 1st quarter of 2016. Now, a question I think we would ask ourselves is, why does this happen? What's happened in that time is several of the key challenges these marketplaces are going to face got solved for them. Why is 2013 the year for electronics? Because Octopart exists now. We don't have to solve the problem of part discovery. If we think about everything that goes into building a product, you can't solve all of those problems all at once as a startup. You maybe have $1 million in the bank, and you've got to figure out how to deploy that money to build technology. And if you've got to solve everything from soup to nuts on this, you're really not going to get there. So that explosion we see in 2013 and 2015, where it takes 2013 is when the companies start. It takes them about 2 years to get those products to market. A lot of that comes from these supporting services. On the mechanical side, they had the same challenges they had to face, which is, how do you take all these varying design files and figure out how to price and cost that? How do you get the geometry out of there, et cetera? They all built on libraries and systems and tools and services that had already solved those core problems. So now they only have to think about, how do I price this and how do I get it manufactured? And that's the world we all lived in at that point. So when we talk about digital transformation, it's really easy to use words like digital transformation that mean very little to people, but talking about an enabling technology to solve a specific problem is really how, within our team, within our organization, that's how we look at it. What problem are we solving today? In this case, Octopart solved part discoverability for us. So we could now go solve the problem of pricing and orchestration on delivering those products. Now, unfortunately, some of these companies are no longer with us. Tempo is no longer with us. Fast Radius is no longer with us. Plethora is no longer with us. 3D Hubs is now acquired by Proto Labs. We're now in the phase where the shakeout is happening in the market. So a lot of companies started then. There's not that big of a market, right? Not all of these companies can become multi-billion-dollar marketplaces. So now we're shaking a lot of those out. But thinking about who are the consumers for marketplaces, for manufacturing platforms. Just like with cloud computing, the early adopters are engineers. We saw this with AWS. It were the software developers, the IT people. These were the people who were using AWS originally. It took a long time for the businesses to catch on. Because why? The engineers are experimenters. They love things. They love control. They loved, with AWS, they loved the idea that they did not have to get someone's permission to go deploy a server, right? Because that's the world I grew up in building software, is if I needed to develop a new service, I had to talk to somebody in IT to go over to the data center, deploy a new server for me to run this on. I had to justify the cost. It was a nightmare. But with AWS, I could just push a button and I would deploy a server in a few seconds, and it only cost a few dollars. I could put it on my own credit card and I wouldn't have to talk to anybody. We see this same behavior happening with manufacturing platforms. Engineers come in and they say, you know what? I'd rather spend $500 on my own credit card than spend 2 days trying to figure out how to get this purchase requisition through my purchasing department. Anything that lets them take control over their own destiny is a solution that they're going to adopt. And we saw that both on the mechanical and electronic side. Now, there's more to it than just control, right? Who gets to do the buying? The previous world, when we talk about electronics or mechanical, you would have to send it to a vendor, then they would tell you why they couldn't build it. What were the problems with your design? Well, now with the platform, I can get that easy DFM feedback, right? I can say, here are the issues. You can tell them in real time. Here are the parts that are not available for your product and will never be available. Here are the aspects of your design which are driving the cost 2 to 3x. The ability, obviously, to access more than one thing. I don't have to go to 2 vendors. If I'm a mechanical engineer, I don't have to go to the CNC machine shop, and I don't have to go to the finishing shop to figure out how much it's going to cost to make this. I can get both of those quotes in one place. The salespeople interaction. Now, not all engineers are this way, but most of the ones I know really don't like talking to people. They like talking to other engineers, right? They like talking about stuff like that. But I have a personal story. When I was running my robotics company, Dynamic Perception, I had an issue. We had a lot of high-mix, low-volume PCBs because we had a lot of specialized camera adapters. So I've got 7 orders out, probably about $40,000 in orders, waiting on one PCB. And this is a $3 PCB to build. It's not of interest to anybody. I call my manufacturer up. I'm like, guys, you are 2 weeks late delivering this batch of PCBs. You can't give me a delivery time. When am I going to get these? I have orders waiting. And I'm like, I'm talking to my salesperson. He goes, you know, I don't know. The line manager's out till Monday, and I'll have to go ask him then, but do you want to go play golf this weekend? I hate golf. I don't want to play golf. I want my boards. I want to ship my products. I would like to, pay my house note this month, right? These are things that really mattered to me. And yet, for a lot of times, for our interactions with salespeople, which is, we have a lot of great salespeople here. I'm not trying to dog on anybody. From an engineer's perspective, all they want to hear is the problem is dealt with and they can get back to what they're doing. And why do I need to talk to someone to do that? If I can upload it and I can see where I am in the process, if I can place that order myself, as an engineer, that's a much better world. That lets me focus on the things that matter to me, which is designing something really cool, not necessarily talking and interacting with other people. We had launched recently, I guess back in Q3, ITAR support through our platform. And one of the very first order came in like 6 hours after we sent out the press release. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And it was a customer we already had. I'm like, hey, so we asked him, why did you come to us with this order? Because you hadn't ordered from us in like 2 years. It's been a while. And he goes, this is the first time in my life I've been able to place an ITAR order without talking to someone. So would you please go away? I said, okay. So when we think about this, right, the engineers drive these platforms, but there's only so much engineering business out there. A lot of it's being consumed already. We look at this little chart. I know it's a little hard to see. I apologize. The size of this here. Proto Labs and Xometry, by the end of 22, represented $700 million in prototype orders. I can put their numbers up here because they're publicly traded. I can tell you the overall market, what it looked like at the end of 2022, without naming all the other names, was about $1 billion. So that's $1 billion in spend in prototype work. But there's not necessarily $10 billion in prototype work out there. There's not a lot of demand, it's very spotty, it's hard to come through. So a lot of these companies are now moving into the production world. And there we have to go to procurement. We have to go to purchasing. And the reality is that is a very different world for a lot of the companies that are operating these digital platforms. And they're having to learn something very new because they were selling to customers who really wanted to come in and transact that way. And now when you want to take that design from prototype into production, we've got a more old school audience to work with, right? They are not as interested in interacting with a platform. The biggest thing that we saw drive transition into the procurement teams was COVID. And you would think like, well, COVID makes them all want to buy digitally. No. The problem is their existing manufacturers couldn't deliver. So they were looking for new options. And, one of the, biggest challenges we look at when we're dealing with moving into a new user base, new customer base, is why are they even talking to us to begin with? Proto Labs had a similar statement because they took their Hubs acquisition that was a marketplace for prototypes and actually transformed it and said, look, we're good at building low volume prototypes in our factories. Let's take this marketplace and make it a production marketplace. And by Q3 of last year, they did $80 million in production through their Hubs marketplace, which was probably 10 times the annual revenue of that marketplace prior. And you know what Proto Labs said about their learning? Is they said, look, we thought we were going to have to come out there with a really slick, really good e-commerce interface. Truth is, they didn't care. They said, I don't even want to look at your platform if I don't have to. Can you price this thing, right? And that's what was driving a lot of these procurement teams to the platforms, is an alternative source for pricing for things that they're having issues with. If I've got to go to 15, 20 factories to figure out how to quote and build this, that's hard. If I can go to one platform and you can give me a price on this is much easier. So that's our first lesson on the transition from engineers to procurement and production on the digital platforms. It's not about the software features. It's about the breadth of pricing and costing it can deliver through one activity to the procurement team. The other challenge that we have had a lot of customers having issues with is moving that design from engineering, from prototype, through NPI and into production, and the loss of information along the way. It's real easy when you can stick with one factory, right? But if you're running hundreds of different prototypes out of your engineering groups every month, and you're then trying to bring a couple of those and do, early market conditions, a few hundred units a month, but this thing's going to be, 10,000 units next year. Those are oftentimes different factories. And we're finding that the procurement teams were price optimizing, right? So they're going around, they're quoting every different job, and they're picking whoever gives them the best price because that's their motivation. Who is giving me the best price on this? So they were switching factories at every stage. They were adding, in some cases, 3 to 6 months of lead time just to figure out how to rebuild that product at the next stage. So we found another number of customers have come in saying, hey, how do I make this easier? I still want the best price. You got to give me the best price, but how do I make this easier to go from that engineer's design to the stuff I need on my shelf here in the warehouse? There's one other area here that I really want to point out is executive-led digitization initiatives. What I don't mean is a bunch of executives sitting in a room saying, how do we digitally transform our procurement? What I do mean is someone's just been hired. This is one of the biggest transitions we've seen towards digital platforms, is when someone brings in as the new VP of procurement, the new VP of supply chain, and they've got to make their mark. They're going to come in here and say, look, you guys are doing this stuff the old way. I'm here, I'm new, I'm going to change things up. I'm going to enable us to become a digital organization. We've seen a lot more of that than sort of natural internal motion. And those work really well. They give you a lot of space because they're risking things, their reputation on this big thing, but they also know it's not going to go easy. But they're fully committed to it because they're brand new. They've talked their teams into this, and so they will stick along through all the road bumps and challenges, and they will convince their teams to buy through these platforms. Unfortunately, not every company has a new executive with that on their agenda, right? So it's a pretty limited market. But this is how you start to prove out and build that household name in the marketplaces. I know in the round table earlier, we're talking about digital native recruits, new people coming in, coming out of college. Hey, this seems kind of archaic. Why do I have to do these spreadsheets? Why do I have to fill this out? Why do I have to call this person on the phone? There's this thing over here that lets me do this myself. Those are also, an excellent driver for this transition. Again, the problem is they often don't have power. They're not given the choice to go do this. So when we think about those particular challenges and what we're seeing, my fundamental message I tell my team all the time is you have to meet the customer where they are. Our job is not to go sell the MacroFab platform to this company. Our job is to go solve a problem for them, right? So what are those problems, right? What are the barriers to implementation for these companies, right? There are spend controls. There are payment terms. They expect credit. They expect 90-day payment terms. They expect you to go through this third party to get your payments. They have multi-step approval processes. They have invoicing and payment. The biggest one is you're a small vendor for a large company. Good luck getting paid on time. How do you track that? How do you manage that? Competitive quoting requirements. I require 3 quotes to do anything. And finally, the site visit and audit. For electronics, this is the hardest one for a marketplace. I have to have every factory that builds my product fill out an audit form, and I have to go visit it on site. What we've learned is that we have to actually directly solve these problems as a marketplace. And all of the marketplaces going into production similarly have this challenge. You have to give them the ability to control the spend at a top-down level, have visibility into that. You have to give them the multi-step approval processes. You have to be able to handle credit terms, and you have to have a solution to the competitive quoting. But you have to go beyond that because that's what their vendors are already solving them today. So what we do is we go to those particular people that we're speaking to at the company and we say, what makes you successful? Not what problems are you having, but how is your boss measuring your success? Well, we have a really hard time being on time. I have a hard time keeping track of that, and I always look like a failure. So my boss says that if I can get 95% of my deliveries on time, I'm going to get a raise this year. Okay, great. Let's show you a control panel where you can see every order you have in, every release, where it's going to be, and which ones might be slipping so that we can work together to get those on time and resolve those problems. Another issue we have with a lot of our customers is what they're sending out for quote is out of date from the actual product they're building. So what do we have to give them? We give them the ability to take the designs managed by the engineers in real time and orderable by purchasing in real time, right? So that they could then say, okay, I know for a fact I've got the latest version, I'm ordering the right one. So you have to build on top of that. And that's what we've learned with a lot of these customers is it is insufficient to just solve their problems. We then have to then enable them to do it, but we still have to go back and figure out exactly what their challenges are and address those directly. And I've talked to a lot of other manufacturing platforms. Surprisingly, most of us all talk to each other, and they all have the same issues. I'm trying to get more production work. The bigger they are, the harder it is, right? I've got $400 million in revenue in prototypes, but I've only got $15 million in production. I can't figure out how to unstick it. Well, the answer is your whole team knows how to deliver to engineers, but not the procurement people. So step backwards, think about the problem not as a platform problem, not as an engineering problem, but how you actually go out there and solve it. That's what I tell them, and that's what we do internally as well. Where are we going with these platforms though, right? It is one thing to have these platforms on the market that can help engineers to go through their prototyping, that can help procurement teams to get access to new capacity and new pricing. But reality is, by being a software platform, it enables us to deliver new solutions to problems. So on the left, right, what we have here is the design through production, through revision lifecycle, being managed by the platform. That's what we're seeing today for most of our customers. The engineers are on board, the purchasing teams are on board. The problem is the data still has to flow from their internal systems to the platforms. So the next major stage of growth for all these platforms as we move from the engineer into procurement and production is really going to be around the tool integration. And I think for a lot of you guys out there that are thinking about your digital initiatives and how you interact with your vendors, it is a huge complex problem to think about every tool you have out there, how does it connect, right? And do I have to have this one big project to let the information flow from my CAD to my PLMs, to my MRPs, to my ERPs, to my vendors? The platforms of the future, right, as we keep going down this path, will make it easier by automatically integrating each one of those through their target users. So the CAD and the PLMs will come in through the engineers. The MRP and the ERPs will come in through the purchasing teams. And each of those will integrate directly, and it'll be the jobs of the platforms to smoothly bring the right data out of each of those systems to the right teams at the right time. That's where we are focused over the next several years. And when I've talked to the other marketplaces, this is all part of their roadmaps as well. That it's really about not just bringing the solutions through these platforms and getting users on the platforms, but letting everybody work where they're already working today and just letting that information flow seamlessly. Now, I know I've moved a little quickly here. I had 45 minutes, but I do have time now. Lots of time for your questions and answers. It depends if they're a mechanical engineer or electronics engineer. If they're an electronics engineer, they probably don't care until their mechie says your PCB doesn't fit in the enclosure. From the mechie perspective, it's critical, right? So if we look at the mechanical platforms, they're all 3D viewers, right? You start with the 3D files, your step files, a lot of times your native CAD files, you drag and drop it in there, and that's what they're working with. On the electronic side, they're like, it's cool when you can show me a 3D model, but I don't need it. There are a handful of fabricators who have APIs now. Those APIs in a lot of cases are limited, or their markets are limited. I don't want to name any names. They're great companies. I've talked to all of them. On one hand, they're either way too expensive for most of the customers to be willing to pay most of the time, or on the other hand, the attributes of those APIs are limited enough that we can't quote 80% of what we would do through there. The people who have APIs are working on it. The rest of the vendors out there, I would say, there's still a manual interface. Like in our case, we work with 2 vendors that have APIs. We order very little through them. The vast majority of our flow goes through more traditional vendors, so we have to have engineers talking to their engineers on every one of these orders, right? We've streamlined a lot of that. We figured out how to take out 90% of the questions and how to automate a lot of that pricing, but there's still a human factor in there. And that is the one area where I'm the most concerned that it will lag behind the others for the longest. The answer is we're incredibly involved. I used that term earlier, managed marketplace. We do all of the purchasing. We do all of the kitting. If there's inventory to be held, it's in our warehouses. We ship that to the factory. We train the factory on how to build a product if it needs training. We do final QA, and MacroFab is the manufacturer of record for the product. So we effectively just buy labor from the factories. And I remember when I started this, everyone said, no factory is going to sell us labor-only jobs. That'll be another story for another time, but the answer is that's not true. Anytime someone tells you something's impossible, but you can see there's real value out there, you just got to figure out how to capture that. So that, in and of itself, creates a challenge for a platform, especially when we think about it. And this is an opportunity for me to go into a little more detail, right? We think of ourselves as a cloud manufacturing platform at the end of the day. And I come from a cloud computing background. And the three core tenets of cloud computing were standardization of workloads, virtualization of resources, and orchestration of deployment to those workloads. So that's how we look at what we're doing. We standardize the customer data into a set that our systems can understand. We virtualize the factories and the vendors into replaceable resources. And then 90% of our investment is in orchestration through each of those steps. And that has enabled us to handle scale of, thousands of people doing one-offs and five-offs mixed in with dozens of people doing multi-year contracts for large volume production. Opportunities for optimization, have we seen those? I see tons of them. The biggest challenge that we see at scale is the system solvable, the software solvable problems are easy to observe, easy to implement, but when you get to production, the bulk of the problems that impact the success of that customer are not easily software solvable. We like to say that everything's a special snowflake, right? There's a unique problem in every particular big production build, especially the hardest for us is when we're reshoring a job from China to Mexico. And that's a good chunk of our business. Nobody knows how to build that product, not the customer, et cetera. They often outsourced all of that knowledge to their Chinese vendors. They often outsource the bill of materials management. So we're coming in with parts that don't exist on the market as far as we know, with processes that aren't documented. So we deploy a pretty good deal of human capital to solving that. And our job is to make sure that the human capital is focused on things that are those special conditions and not the everyday flow, right? So we build tools to identify where challenges are occurring. For example, one of the big things we have is a dashboard. Shows you every order going through the system right now, and it's predicting whether or not there's going to be a problem in that order, right? And different systems are being looked at, analyzing that data and saying, over here, this person was tasked with doing this one thing. It was due yesterday. It didn't happen today. When I predict the impact of the slip on that, that results in a 1-week delay in that order. So it's looking at things like that. That part, we had ordered it. It had this dock date. Only half of it showed up. It automatically flags that and brings that to a human and says, okay, now you need to go resolve this problem. We need to unstick this. So I can only speak to it from our perspective. What we're finding is technology is making sourcing easier. The more people like Orbweaver help us get insight into our vendors, our technology is able to take that information coming from sourcing, and as we do more things to the automated side and predict what the humans should do. And what we're going to see is over the next several years, these are just going to get better and better across the front, because everybody talks about AI, but machine learning is where it's at for these things, right? An LLM is not going to help you with your sourcing challenges, but a good machine learning algorithm will. And so data is now flowing more rapidly through the supply chain to help with automating those sourcing decisions. The buying, on the other hand, the automation mechanisms have been there for a while, right? This is not new territory. There's a lot of work to deploy them into a company. If you build your company like ours from the ground up around that automation, it's a lot easier. But the big challenge, I think, especially us as an electronics industry, are going to be overcoming over the next 10 years is the transparency of pricing. That is the biggest problem that we're going to face from a sourcing and a purchasing perspective is, this happens all the time. We know this. The customer comes to you with a product and says, I want this price point. And you look at it and you say, there's no way you can have this price point. Well, I've been building it at this price point for years. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, I've got registered pricing for 3/4 of the parts in here, and no one in the supply chain tells you, right? So those sorts of things are, everybody knows about it, everybody's thinking about it, everybody's trying to work on it. But from the purchasing perspective, it's all about problem solving. Do the teams have the tools to solve problems that the computers cannot handle, that the systems cannot handle automatically? Do they work primarily in a problem-solving mode? And is that where those relationships really become valuable? I think that's how I look at it. That's what our procurement team does, is it says anything the system couldn't figure out how to source, we will come in, take the data that's there, and make the right decision. And then the purchasing team's job is to make sure that actually gets purchased at the target prices and it's all available, but they only deal with the fallout. Same thing with what David was talking about earlier, put expert people on people problems and put the computers on the general flow of everything. All right, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Chris.